Welcome to the full guide, some of the most popular chess strategies for beginners, or we're going to be going in depth. So first, I will start with the Queen Gambit's decline, and this is when, this move is being played by white. I'll also show you how this position was reached on the board. Let's start with d4, d5, c4, e6. So when white plays this move, okay, he basically wants to sacrifice his pawn and take control of that center part of the board. Okay, so black wants to avoid this line, right? And you want to play this move instead. Instead of taking that pawn, instead of just blindly taking that extra piece, you want to build your structure further. Okay, so by you declining white's temporary pawn sacrifice, you are solidifying your position to protect that pawn and get a foothold in that center. Now look at white's pawns. They do not have a good structure. They're just hanging there, right? So now I'll show you how that position was reached in the first place. So to reach the queen's gambit decline, first white must move the queen's pawn 2 squares. So to d4, like that, okay? So that is the first thing that happens. And then black replies by moving his queen's pawn 2 squares. So to d5. Now white wants to basically attack the d5 pawn by moving his pawn 2 squares, right? To c4. So it's trying to attack that. So white puts his pawn there also as like a sacrifice. All right. So what black wants to do here is black needs to defend his d5 pawn by moving his king's pawn 1 square. Okay, so this is the queen's gambit declined. Now you're probably wondering, why play the queen's gambit decline? So declining the queen's gambit has been proven to be one of the best ways to counter the queen's gambit opening. Okay, so this option is most used. It's the most used counter actually at the highest levels of chess. Now what I'll do, guys, I'll also show you the different ways of declining the queen's gambit. So first I'll be starting with the Ragozin variation. Now the Ragozin variation is actually the most popular way. It's similar to the Nimzo Indian defense to decline the queen's gambit. It is basically characterized by pinning the c3 knight, okay, and indirectly putting pressure on e4. I'll show you exactly what's going on. So black will basically gain a lead in development, and his strategic problem is the c8 bishop. That's the main problem here, as you can see, which can be solved with either c5 or, e5. I'll show you that too, okay? So in the Ragozin variation, okay, what happens is this. The black is pinning the knight to the king, right? You bring that knight here, you pin the king. Okay? So when you do that, what happens is you move your pawn here forward, you solidify this bishop as well, and then what will happen, white will take that piece, move his pawn forward, and then now what you're doing, you're bringing even more pressure on this one knight. You're trying to break his whole structure of defense, or you can go ahead and take this one instead, okay, with the knight. Now, if you go ahead and take this one, right, if they take this one, then you would go ahead and take it right there, and what that will do, it will unblock the c8 bishop instead, right? So that is perfectly fine for you. Okay, this is a extremely aggressive way for black to actually play. Okay, I'll show you another one. I'll show you another variation, which is an extremely flexible opening system for black. Let me show you that one actually. So in the Tarrasch defense, black challenges the center immediately and solves the problem of the passive light squared bishop on c8. Okay, so they're trying to solve this problem. So when black is moving this pawn forward, he wants to basically ruin white's center. and provoke him to take this pawn, right? And this will solve the problem of the light squared bishop. Basically, if they take this pawn will go ahead and eat up this pawn. We'll take that pawn, and boom, you've solved your problem of the light squared bishop. Now, in exchange, he can get an isolated pawn right there, you see? Which is very, very hard to defend. You are very, very much in a problem. Okay, that isolated D pawn. Now, this way of playing is extremely aggressive for black to play, right? And another variation, guys, is this one right here. The Jaroszek variation. This is an extremely, extremely flexible opening system for black. Now, by playing this variation, black wants to castle kingside as soon as possible and prevent the annoying, a bishop to g5 pin, making it less effective in advance. So I'll show you. So here, by not developing the knight to f6, black is basically preventing the annoying bishop to g5 pin to the queen. Okay, this happens a lot. So you're avoiding that, right? So instead, you play this move. You bring that bishop in front of that queen right there. So making that pin less effective. So anytime you play that move first and then you bring your knight out. So anytime you can just move your knight away and boom, the white's bishop is in trouble. And then you can do some surprise attacks with that. So the bishop is in trouble and your knight is also doing some fork somewhere, right? And you're also basically preparing the castle, the kingside castle, as soon as possible to go ahead and protect your king for the black side, right? Okay, so now I'm going to explain to you every move, how to reach each variation. So we were talking about the Ragozin variation. So this one appears on the board after the following moves. Okay, d4, d5, c4, a6, and then we go ahead and get that knight to c3, knight to f6, knight to f3, and then bishop to b4. So black is countering by moving the bishop right there, right? Now, if you're probably wondering why to play the Ragozin variation, okay, by playing this variation, black gains a lead in development and only has one strategic problem. The c8 bishop being blocked, in which that can be solved, right? We talked about c5 or a5, right? So I'll show you what the idea is for black, then I'll show you what white can do to counter this, okay? There's no point in me showing you a whole opening, a strategy, and you only know how to do one side of it. What if someone else is doing it on you? What are you going to do? How are you going to react, right? You need to learn both sides. So we'll also show you what black's trying to do. Black is trying to pin that knight to the king, move his pawn forward, right? And then when white takes up that pawn, they will put pressure onto this knight with the queen, with the, knight, put a lot of pressure. The bishop's also putting pressure. Or when they take that one, you unblock the c8 bishop. So that's the idea for black. Now, what can white do? So white right now puts that bishop right there. Okay, the dark squared bishop to pin a black's knight to the queen. So with this move, bishop to g5, white is pinning that knight to the queen, and black can defend the d5 pawn as well anymore, since if it moves, the queen is under attack, right? So you pin the knight to the queen, and if it moves, queen's under attack. That is the main idea right there for white, okay? And what I can also show you is the control flank diagonal. I'll show you that as well. So let's say, if white puts the queen here, okay, to attack this bishop, and then white takes that pawn, and then move this pawn, right? You solidify your whole pawn structure, as you can see, and you're basically putting pressure on this diagonal to the king. So let me show you again what I was talking about. So you bring that queen there. Let's say you're attacking this bishop. Black moves his knight forward, right, to basically develop his pieces. protect that bishop. You take that pawn, and then you go ahead and black takes that pawn back. You move that pawn. You have solidified your pawn structure. You bring out your bishop. Boom, you're attacking that diagonal very, very hard. Okay? And also, guys, in the e2 e4 breakthrough, white basically occupies the central squares in exchange for long-term pawn structure weaknesses. So look, by bringing the bishop here, black is pinning the knight to the queen, and you move this pawn forward. You take control of the center, right? That is a very, very beautiful move as well. Now you're probably wondering, what if I'm black? What would you do? So when white plays this move, black needs to put his knight right here. So what you're doing, you're protecting this knight, and if white takes it, black can place his other knight back here. Really that easy, and you're still protecting this pawn. You see, that is a much, much better option. Also, guys, when white moves this pawn forward, what you need to do in order to play this move and bring the knight here, you need to, to put pressure on c3. Okay, you need to put as much pressure. Use those joint forces you have available. Okay, put a lot of pressure, get your breakthrough going when white moves that pawn forward, right? Now we'll go over the Tarrasch defense. Okay, so how to basically reach this. So this one appears on the board after the following moves. Okay, d4, d5, c4, e6. So black is responding back, moving that pawn, protecting that pawn, right? And then we have a knight to c3. And then we have a black plays pawn to c5. This is the Tarrasch defense. Okay? Now, I will show you why to play the Tarrasch defense. Now, this defense is a double-edged sword. It will either really hurt you or your opponent. One of you is going to get hurt. Okay? So black wants to neutralize white's central space advantage and free the bad of light. Squared bishop on c8. The main downside of the Tarrasch defense is the isolated queen's pawn, which appears in many variations. Okay, let me show you this. So when black is moving that pawn, he wants to basically ruin white's center, provoke him to take this pawn, basically to solve the problem of the light squared bishop. In exchange, he can get an isolated pawn, which is hard to defend. So I'm showing you this from, a white's perspective. You see that problem? I'll actually show you the most popular move from white. So he wants to weaken the black central pawn, a formation, So what they would do is this. So by taking that pawn, you're weakening the black central pawn formation. You basically put your knight right here, protect this pawn, and then you play g3. So you get that for your bishop. So whenever you have any problems, right? Or you can easily fork people, give surprise attacks with the bishop. That is a very good idea. So you can also do a castle king side to protect the king. And white can give a black an isolated queen pawn as well. As you can see right there, let me show you that move again. You take that piece, and then you are attacking it. Look at how many pieces are potentially attacking that one pawn. You see, guys? So usually, as long as more of your pieces are attacking one piece, and they're not defending it as much, that is a flaw in their defense. Now, if black plays this move, they play c4 to c5, white should move his b pawn in order to ruin black's pawn formation and create an isolated pawn. So this is what you do. Move this pawn forward. Then they'll have to eat that up, and then you take it up with a queen. You have basically just ruined black's pawn formation, and that is an isolated pawn. No other pawn can go ahead and get adjacent to it to protect it. Isolated pawn, big weakness. Bad move from black. Now, let me show you another possible move from black. So by playing h6, by black moving this pawn, black wants to increase his control over the g5 square and prevent white from pinning the knight to the queen. So you're basically preventing this move right here, right? That is what you are trying to prevent. Well placed in front of the knight. Not quite right there at the end, but in front of the knight. So what black needs to do to protect his king is castling kingside, okay? Now we'll go over the Jaroszek variation, okay, of the queen's gambit declined. And it basically happens after these moves. So pawn to d4, pawn to d5, okay? Black basically is mirroring by moving this pawn. And then we have white putting their pawn right there, okay, on c4. We have e6, okay? Now here, knight to c3, white puts their knight there, and then bishop to e7, okay? Now, let me explain to you what is going to go on. This is the Jaroszek variation. So by playing this variation, black basically wants to castle on the king side as soon as possible. They're trying to prevent the annoying bishop to g5 pin. Okay? As you can see, this is the pin. They want to avoid this. So you're trying to make this less effective in advance. You play this move, you bring your bishop there, you make that pin less effective, and then you can go ahead and castle to protect your king. Now I'll show you some of the most popular moves for white. So he simply just goes in and takes that pawn, and then you weaken black central pawn formation. As you can see, very weak. And you put your bishop right there before playing, pawn to e3. So even if they move the knight there, have the bishop there, you have created a concealed pawn wall. A very solid formation for white. Now let's say black puts their bishop right there. What is going to happen? Now these moves, white basically plays here. Okay, you're chasing that bishop away, getting more space on that king side. You bring that pawn forward. Okay, you have a lot more space. Look at this. White is more developed, taking a lot more space in the center. Most of black's pieces are still behind there, right? So white is doing pretty well. Good structure and everything. More development, more central space control so far. Now here's what black could do. So by playing this move, okay, black wants to solidify his position and put the bishop to the most active square. Okay, you're protecting this pawn, put your bishop right there. You're controlling that key diagonal right there. That is another option for black. Now, normally the Jaroszek variation of the Queen's Gambit decline, black castles kingside to protect his king. And this is also what black can do. You can move the pawn right there, place that bishop right there. You're protecting the d5 pawn, and you're controlling that diagonal. In case of anything, you can just go ahead and eat that other pawn, or when they go ahead and let's say take your pawn easily, you can go ahead and use that move as well, right? Now we'll go over another one of the most popular chess defenses or openings. This is the Sicilian defense. So this is a chess opening when the following moves are played. Okay, so we have white moving the king's pawn 2 squares. A very common move, guys. A lot of beginners also do this, all the way up to the advanced players. So black responds here by moving the c pawn 2 squares. This is the Sicilian defense, and I'll explain this more in depth for you, okay, from both sides, white and black. So what's the deal? What's the idea behind this. The idea behind the Sicilian defense is basically white has played right e4 as the first move, trying to fight for the center since the very beginning of the this open game. So black responds by moving the c pawn, also controlling the important central d4 square, okay, right here, and creating an asymmetrical position. Okay, so black gets a strong control of this d4 square right there, and if white puts his pawn on d4, black can exchange a wing pawn for a center one. Okay, you can see we got access to the center, and we have taken out that pawn, right? We have exchanged it, and now white does not have a pawn for the center right there. So the open Sicilian defense is divided into 4 major variations based on a black's response. Although there are many other less played options to be explored, so we'll go over these ones. So we have the Najor variation, we have the Dragon variation, the Classical variation, and the Scheveningen variation. Okay, those are the 4 variations we will go and look at for now. Now, in the Najor variation, black plays a6 to avoid the possible, bishop b5 move, and prepares the ambitious advance, e7 to e5. So the main idea is to control that square. So the bishop cannot go there, not check the king, right? And that square is basically being controlled. Black wants to advance this pawn and, force white to move that knight. Okay, gain more control in the center. Now, in the Sicilian Dragon variation, what happens is a black, so this is what black does with the f8 bishop to gain control of the crucial dark squares. Puts the bishop right here, controlling the longest diagonal on the board, as you can see right there, and it's attacking white's queen side pretty aggressively. So when white basically castles queen side, black can go ahead and attack on that flank. So that is the main idea behind that. Okay, now in the classical variation, black develops the b8 knight earlier than the other variations and challenges white's d4 knight. This leads to imbalanced game. So black, if you develop this knight early, you put pressure on the center. Black can go ahead and swing his queen over, put further pressure on the center. White will usually go ahead and place his bishop right there. Okay, try to exchange this bishop for the knight. You see that happen many times. Okay, and if you're still a very beginner, you'll see that will happen a lot. And they're also trying to double black's pawns right there. Okay, that is what it will end up causing. And in the Scheveningen variation, black puts his pawn right there, control of those squares. Also sets up a flexible pawn structure, so black can later advance either this pawn or this pawn forward. So how do you counter the Sicilian defense? There are 2 ways to counter the Sicilian defense. One is to use the niche lines against the Sicilian, and also choose lines that will lead to positional or tactical games. Okay, that is how you counter it. So you can use the niche lines against the Sicilian, right? It is complicated to learn and master. It's not possible to learn the hundreds of variations, but to beat the Sicilian, you specialize in some niche lines that people don't actually know, and use that line as your weapon of choice against the Sicilian. Okay, so a niche line is a line that is good, but not commonly played, and that is what is done at the highest levels of chess. For example, in the World Chess Championship match between Caruana and Magnus. Okay, Caruana started with a king's pawn opening. Magnus responded with a Sicilian. And Caruana plays the open Sicilian, right, which I showed you. Magnus responded with this move right here. This move indicates an accelerated dragon is coming. So Caruana knows that Magnus is an expert in this opening. And this opening will lead to a positional game. That is not good for Caruana, since against Magnus, Caruana wants to play more tactically and aggressively, because that will allow for positions where Magnus can make mistakes. So Caruana plays this move. So this move is a niche line of the Sicilian. Okay, the Rosolimo. Okay, the Rosolimo. This is a good move that is uncommonly played, and Magnus was actually unprepared for it. So this line led to tactical board positions. The same idea actually happened, guys, between Kasparov and Karpov. And Karpov actually started with a king's pawn opening. Kasparov responded with a Sicilian, and Karpov plays the open Sicilian. And Kasparov countered with the open Sicilian there, played that king's pawn further one step. And after the regular moves are played, as such, takes, and then we have the knights developing right there. Kasparov surprises Karpov with the pin variation, as you can see right there. This is a niche line that Kasparov prepared and Karpov was unfamiliar with. Okay, so that is what you want to do. Take advantage of those niche lines. Prepare very, very well on those niche lines that people might not be familiar with. That is what is done in the highest levels of chess. Okay, then you're probably going to ask me how to beat the Sicilian, alright? So you need to steer the board towards positional or tactical lines, okay? So that is what you need to do. For example, against the Sicilian dragon, if you're better tactically, choose lines that aggressively attack your opponent. For example, in a Yugoslav attack, this is the most aggressive attack, right? This is what you do. Bring that pawn up there, bring the bishop in, take that other bishops there, put them in aggressive squares, or launch your h-pawn as a battery ram to break open the black's kingside pawn formation. And then you use the queen and bishop. Okay, you exchange bishops, you weaken black's, dark square control. Just keep in mind, guys, if your opponent is playing a dragon, they're probably very tactical, since the Sicilian dragon is the sharpest defense in chess. So if you play tactical lines against someone worse than you, you could just make one mistake and lose the game. So you may want to choose to play more positional games to avoid board positions with tactics. So against the same dragon, you can choose to play classically. You castle on the same side as your opponent. This avoids opposite side attacks. Ideas are retreating the knight to b3. Let's the queen control the d5 square. Launch a less aggressive kingside attack. Now let's say you're playing against an accelerated dragon. This line leads to games that are extremely positional. Now, white, instead of trying to attack aggressively, white will keep a Maroczy bind over black. So we have that. Now, this is a white pawns on c4 and e4. Okay. And this is basically where black doesn't have control over d5. So if you're playing someone more positional than you, or you are better tactically than positionally, you could launch a Yugoslav attack. As you can see right here, this is a very aggressive tactical attack. It's not normally used against an accelerated dragon, and could put your position, opponent in a more uncomfortable position, as you can see right here. Very, very beautiful. If you're probably still wondering what the Sicilian defense is, it is a chess opening where you basically, after the move e4, right, for the white side, takes the pawn on the king's side 2 squares. Black responds by moving the c pawn 2 squares to c5, and that is what it looks like. This is the Sicilian defense. Remember, this is how you identify it. Okay, so why play the Sicilian defense. Now, Sicilian defense is the most common response to, e4 from the white side. So, by advancing the c pawn at the first move, black creates an asymmetry in the pawn structure, right? This will lead to an imbalanced position that gives black higher chances to win. So if you're black, you have a higher chance of win with the Sicilian defense. Okay, you just have to convert your chance as well. Now, besides this, the move, okay, c5 also controls the important d4 square. This means that white will not be able to maintain a pawn on d4, controlling the center together with e4. And if white puts his pawn on d4, black can exchange a wing pawn for center one. Okay? Now we'll go over the Najdorf variation. Now, this is a chess opening that begins with these following moves. We have, e4, c5, a knight to f3. Okay? White moves that g1 knight to f3, and black goes for this move right here, d6. Okay, the d7 pawn to d6, and white should, okay, what they can do is they can go ahead and play this move right here, right, at d4, and then we have takes. Black takes the d pawn, white takes it back with the knight, and black plays a knight from g8 to f6, attacking the e4 pawn, and white defends this pawn with the move a knight, okay, b1, and it's defending c3. Okay, and after this, black plays the a7 pawn to a6, and this is the Najdorf variation. Okay, now you're probably wondering, why play the Najdorf variation? Now, the Najdorf variation is one of the most popular line of the Sicilian defense. So the main idea behind this line is to prepare the move e7 to e5, which offers black a majority in the center and lots of ambitious attacking ideas. Okay, once you control that square, you prevent the bishop from coming there, attacking our king. The square is control. Black can advance this pawn, force the white to move the knight. Okay, gain more control in the center. That is the main idea. So, what can white do? So, let's do the setup first. So, place the, bishop right there. Okay, put the queen behind that bishop. You castle on the queen side. Place that pawn there, preventing black from placing his knight, and also exchange trading for our bishop. Now, this setup is known as the English attack, right? So white should basically expand on the king side and attack the opponent's king. That is the main idea here. And the main line against the Najdorf variation is this move, bishop to g5. Now, this move discourages black from going for the immediate, e7, e5 plan. Okay, so you're pinning this pawn from moving, since if this pawn moves forward, the knight cannot move, since the queen will be exposed. So black would ideally place his e-pawn here to chase away white's knight, place his own knight here. Okay, that is the main idea. So what are black's moves, right? The introductory move, right? Let's see. The main idea is to control the square. That is the main idea for black. Another one is to place this pawn right here, and also controlling the c file. So controlling the c file would give black lots of counterplay, a lot of counterplay, especially while white is focused on attacking on the king side. Okay, next I'll show you the dragon variation as well. So the dragon's variation begins with this move. White, moves the e-pawn 2 squares, basically to a4. Then black responds with a c5, entering the Sicilian. And after this, white moves the g1 knight to f3. Black goes for the move d6. Okay, moves his d7 pawn to d6. And white can react with this move, a pawn on d2 to d4. Black would capture the d pawn, and white takes it back with the knight. Black plays knight to f6, attacking the e4 pawn. White goes ahead and defends this pawn with this move, knight to c3. The knight on b1 to c3. Now black goes for this move right here, a g7, pawn to g6. This is the dragon variation. Now you're probably wondering, why play the dragon variation? So, in the dragon variation, black places his dark squared bishop on a g7 to aim at the center and the queen side. This variation often leads to opposite castles and, sharp attacking games. So it's controlling the longest diagonal on the board, attacking white's queen side. So then when, white's castle queen side, black can attack on that flank. That is the main idea. So let me show you some moves for white. So what white should do is try to exchange his bishops for blacks. Okay, white would do this by placing his bishop right here. You're basically forcing an exchange. Exchange is forced. There's nothing they can do. They have to do the exchange. Okay, that is one idea. Another thing would be, if for white in the dragon variation, is to launch a king's side attack. On this flank, on the king side flank, attack it with moves such as, f4, g4, things like that. Go ahead and attack that part very, very aggressively, that flank very aggressively. And also do not forget, controlling the d5 square is very, very critical, very important for white in the dragon variation, since black often wants to play the move d6 to d5 to open up the center. Okay, you want to prevent this from happening. This is the kind of structure you would like to have. Prevent that from happening. Do not let them gain control of the center. Now, what are black's moves? On the dragon, black places his bishop right here, so he can control the squares on this diagonal. Okay, and also black should break through on the queen side to counter white. So both expanding by, advancing the A and B pawns and controlling the C file are great plans for black. Okay, so black will try to develop a pawn storm and use the semi-open C file to attack right there. Also, guys, playing d5 is a very common plan in this Sicilian defense. So, this pawn break is going to be one of the most common ways for black to fight for counterplay, since it opens files and gives black space in the center. Also has the power to disrupt white's control of the position, because if he is too focused on a wing attack, his pieces could be discoordinated and the center could be left unprotected, since black can manage to equalize or even get an advantage if this move is played. So this basically is going to give black a good counterattack on the d file, can disrupt white's attack by pressuring e4, as you can see right there. Okay, now we'll go over the classical variation. So this is a chess opening that goes for the following moves. Okay, pawn to e4. White starts by moving the e pawn 2 squares. Black responds with pawn to c5, entering the Sicilian. And then white plays with knight to f3. Okay, the g1 knight goes to f3, and black goes for this move, pawn from a d7 to d6. And then white can react with the move taking the d2 pawn to d4, and black can go ahead and capture that d pawn. And when white takes it back with that knight, okay, to d4, black plays a knight to from g8 to f6, basically attacking the e4 pawn, and white can defend the pawn with the move knight from b1 to c3. And after this, black would go to, knight to c6. This is the classical variation. Okay. I can also do a quick speed run of the same so you can see what is going on. Now this is where we reach the classical variation. Now you're probably wondering why to play the classical variation. Now in the classical variation, unlike in the other, Sicilian main lines, black chooses to develop the, b8 knight before the f8 bishop. Okay, by doing so, black puts lots of pressure in the center and the d4 knight. Okay, as in the other lines, the resulting positions will be imbalanced and full of opportunities for both sides. So if you are better in such scenarios where you're more tactful, go for these games, okay? So black would develop this knight early, use it to pressure the center. Black can swing his queen over, further pressure that center. White will usually place his bishop right here and trying to exchange his bishop for this knight to double black's pawns. That is the main idea both parties are trying to play. Now let me show you some of white's moves, some of the main ideas from white. So the move, bishop to g6 is the most common against the classical variation. And even when you're a beginner, you tend to instinctively play this, okay? So this move basically threatens to, double the black's pawns. If the bishop takes this knight and prevents, the black from getting that black squared bishop right there, then you see black can place his bishop on this diagonal. That is the main idea. So that's why we are trying to double this. So now black cannot place it right here. Okay, this knight. And if he places it here, it is pretty much undefended. Okay, cannot control this entire diagonal because its on pawn is blocking it in. Okay. Now advancing the f pawn is a very, very common plan in many variations of the Sicilian, since it allows white to grab some space on the king side. So white would normally advance his f-pawn right here, trying to gain control on the e5 square. That is the main idea that white is trying to play. As you can see, right here is gaining this control. And if, black pushes those pawns, you can go ahead and grab it up. And no, the knight cannot go there, things like that. Bishops are stuck, right? That is the main idea, controlling that important square. So in this classical variation, what black would want to do is control the center with the two knights. The main purpose of the, introductory move, okay, to put pressure on the white center since the very beginning of the game. So let's see, black plays knight c3, right? This move challenges white's d4 knight, also controls the e5 square. The f6 knight also controls the central squares, and these knights give black control of the center. You can see he's controlling this. The whole of the center is being controlled by black's knights. Okay. Now, what are some of the counterattacks? So, as in the other, Sicilian variations, black can get some serious counterplay if he manages to prepare the d5 break. So, as you already know, this pawn break can give black's position a lot of activity, especially on the center of the board, right here. Okay, so black would play a d5 to gain space and attack the center. Now we'll go over the Scheveningen variation. Now this is a chess opening, which starts like this. Pawn to e4, c5, knight to f3, d6. Okay. Black goes for this move, and white can react with the move d4. Black should usually take this pawn. White takes it back with a knight, and black plays knight to f6, attacking the e4 pawn, and white would defend this pawn with this move. Okay. Knight on b1 to protect c3. After this, black plays e7 pawn to e6, and this is the Scheveningen variation. Okay, now you're probably wondering, why should we even play this variation? This variation provides black with a very flexible pawn formation. The positions that arise from this opening are very interesting, full of ideas for both sides. Okay, black puts his pawn right there, controlling these squares. Look at all these squares being controlled, guy. Controlled, 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 controlled by these two pawns. Also sets up a flexible pawn structure. Okay, and so that black can later advance either this pawn or this pawn forward. Very, very flexible, as you can see. So you're probably wondering, what are some of white moves? So white moves, one of their plans is to control the center with f4. So advancing as f pawn, okay, allows white to control the central square and some squares on the knight, the king side flank, right there. As you can see, both these squares are being controlled. Now, a typical plan for white in the Scheveningen is to develop a kingside attack, often by creating a pawn storm on the other side of the board. As you can see right here, it's a big pawn storm coming in, developing all these pawns, attacking this king side flank, especially when they're castled. So, stopping black from playing at b5. Okay, it's the big idea behind most Sicilian positions. That is the main idea. You're trying to prevent black from playing pawn to d5. Okay, that is what we are trying to prevent. That is why we're going through all of these efforts. Now you're probably wondering, what are black moves here? So for black, look, central breaks can be very important to react to white's kingside attack. So you're trying to break into the center with either e5 or d5. Okay, that is your main goal. So let's say you advance the e pawn, chases away the white's knight. With black's eventual goal is to put his own piece there. If black advances the d pawn, open his lines up, exchanges can open up either side of the the d or e files. So it depends, and then you can do a bunch of attacks. You're attacking this file, the idea maybe you could take this in with that, right? You can come here, attack the pawn, of course, but the knight is there blocking. But we have a lot of ideas going on, right? And also the semi-open C file is very often a source of counterplay for black. Okay, this is one of the big ideas for black, is to point his rook in this direction. So once we have that opened up, to basically attack that square. Also, guys, if black, wants to prevent white's kingside expansion, then this move, h7 pawn to h6, can be very helpful to stop white from playing an early g5, which could result in a dangerous attack. Okay, so this would basically discourage white from expanding too much, controlling this part of the board. So I hope this guide helps you guys, and this opening strategies will give you a very, very solid foundation and save you a lot of time in the start of the game. Because in the start of the game, you would be losing time by thinking too much on opening moves. You want to understand how different lines goes, different variation goes. So you want to master some niche lines to really get advantage. You guys, you can beat some very, very pro level players, right? At the top of their game. If you master some niche lines and you're good tactfully, you can really crush some big opponents, even if you're not there yet. So you can study these, you can study more strategies. So I hope this helps you out, and if it did, consider smashing that like button, as well as subscribing to the channel if you appreciate this full free course. And I'll see you in the next one.